Today I want to highlight 3 words from St. Luke's Gospel. Each one says something that is essential for your spiritual life and for mine. The 3 words are haste, astonish, and treasured. We hear that the shepherds went in haste to Bethlehem and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in the manger. They heard a message from the angels, and they went quickly to what the angels told them to do. This, of course, echoes something that happened a little earlier in Luke's Gospel. Mary receives the announcement from the angel and went in haste to the hill country to visit her cousin Elizabeth. This is a basic response from the Bible. Once you know what it is that God wants you to do, once you have received the call, the vocation, the invitation, or God's will becomes clear, then you must act. You must get up and go. I think one of the central tragedies in the spiritual life is that we know what God wants, and we don't do it. We know what God wants, but we can procrastinate, we can dawdle, we can make excuses. St. John Henry Newman said, "We've all been created by God for some definite purpose." The shepherds knew what God wanted them to do. Mary knew what God wanted her to do, and they both went in haste. The second word I want to reflect on is astonished. The gospel account tells us that all were astonished by what the shepherds told them. Of course, it's true that we find God in ordinary things and ordinary events, and it would be wrong for us to expect amazing, spectacular things to happen often in the spiritual life. Most often, we find God in the ordinary run of things. We find God in our families, in our relationships, in nature. But at the same time, there are events where God does do extraordinary things. In the Old Testament, God chose Abraham, called him to be the father of a great nation. God chose Moses to lead his people out of slavery into the promised land. And above all, God becomes present in our world through Jesus Christ, who becomes one of us. And this is not the ordinary run of things. This is not something anyone could see or imagine. This is an extraordinary event of God coming into our world, breaking into our existence, and astonishing us. God, who fashions everything that exists, chooses to become a tiny, helpless child. Our faith depends on such extraordinary and astonishing moments. And part of our spiritual life is paying close attention, enough to be attentive to catch those moments that God brings to us in our own lives. We need to have moments of astonishment where we are full of awe. I love an observation that was made by a great famous English author, G.K. Chesterton. He was gazing at the wonder of the statues on the front of Chartres Cathedral. And when he looked at all the different saints that were being represented in the front of the facade of the cathedral in France, he noticed that they had one very obvious characteristic. Their eyes were wide open. They were closing their eyes. They weren't closing their eyes like so many statues that we might see in church that are in contemplative prayer. But they were looking out at the world and seeing something amazing. And Chesterton writes in this observation that this is the astonishment that we as Christians should have. So like the shepherds, we, like those who heard the shepherds, have our eyes wide open by what God does we're astonished by it from time to time. Because that moment, or those moments of astonishment, is what makes evangelization possible. I mean, why would we bother announcing something unless we found it pretty amazing? If it was just the ordinary run of things that anyone could see easily enough, why would we bother announcing it? We are called to proclaim Jesus Christ risen from the dead because we experience him and are amazed by him. Perhaps this could be the problem with evangelization as well. We who are called by our baptism have lost a sense of wonder, of astonishment. And finally, the third word, treasured. Luke tells us that Mary treasured all these things in her heart. We know that Mary went in haste to care for her cousin Elizabeth. She moved as one pregnant woman with good news that needed to be shared. We also know that Mary took a third step. She treasured all these things that happened to her in her heart. And what does that mean? It means that in the quiet of her mind and her heart, she looked back at these events that happened. She contemplated, and she turned these events over in her mind and her heart, and she was amazed, and she treasured them. Why would she do that? Well, here's how I see it. I don't know if you know this, but I'm a lover of Shakespeare. And I read or I see at least 3 Shakespeare plays every year. And I reread them, and I've been doing that for years now. So that each time when I read Romeo and Juliet, or I read King Lear, I see something new, because that's what good art does. It speaks to you again and again. Someone who loves music will enjoy listening to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony again and again. Now, I treasure these works of art in my heart. But Mary treasured not just a drama, not just a symphony. Mary treasures one of the greatest dramas of all time. What Mary treasured is the astonishing fact that because of her yes, God has become one of us. So I'd like to challenge you during this Easter season, which calls us to stop and to take a posture of waiting and expectation, and to follow Mary's example, to reflect on God's love in our life, and to be awakened by the wonder of it all. And in that awareness, and in that wonderment, and in that appreciation, to stand up and to share that astonishing news with others.